The 5 Aspects of Your Story's Plot, Part 3. If you've been following along with my 5-part series on your story's plot, then you have already watched the first 2 videos, Exposition and the Rising Action. If you're just joining this series, I suggest you take the time and watch the first videos before beginning this one. We now start Part 3 of my series on understanding the plot of your story, and we will be examining the big finale of your story, better known as the climax. I know, for some of you, hearing the word climax floods your thoughts with, let's say, a more carnal act, which stands to reason since the climax of your story is quite parallel to what takes place in the average bedroom. It might seem confusing, but the principle is the same. Time for another of my little tales. It was just turning 11:15 p.m. when Detective Chief Inspector Wright stepped into the lobby of the recently completed 4-story apartment building and, after closing his umbrella, handed it to his assistant, Detective Constable Montague. Apart from 2 other constables, one guarding the door to ensure no one enters or leaves the premises, and the other keeping watch over 3 of the tenants living directly across from the building. Detective Chief Inspector Wright took a quick glance over at them, 2 men and a woman. He noticed that all 3 were dressed as one might before retiring for the night. Detective Constable Montague explained their presence. This is Tom Barrett, Francis Hillary, and Imogen Darcy. They each have apartments directly across from the deceased and claim to be witnesses to the fatal shooting before coming over to investigate. Without saying a word to them, Detective Chief Inspector Wright asked to be shown to the decedent's apartment. They walked up to the 2nd floor and down the hallway. Once inside, he stood in the doorway of the deceased woman's bedroom and stared down at her body lying across her bed. After a while, he walked into the room, and after sitting on the bed next to the body, he stared out of the window at the building across the courtyard. He then stood up and spoke. One of our 3 witnesses is the killer. He then went back down to the lobby to question the 3 witnesses. I will need to ask you each 2 very important questions. He started with Tom Barrett. Where is your apartment in relation to the decedent's apartment? It is directly across from it on the 2nd floor, he answered. And what were you doing when you heard the shot? Tom thought for a moment and then answered, I didn't exactly hear the shot. I was watching TV when I saw the flash out of the corner of my eye from her apartment and assumed it was a gunshot. Detective Chief Inspector Wright then turned to Francis Hillary. And where is your apartment in relation to the decedent's apartment? Well, my apartment is right next to Tom's on the 2nd floor and directly across from the dead girl's also. And did you hear a shot or merely see the flash like your next door neighbor? I was staring out at the weather when I also only saw the flash. He then stepped over to Imogen Darcy. And where is your apartment in relation to the decedent's apartment? Well, I have a ground floor apartment on the corner facing the walkway. And what were you doing when you heard the gunshot? Well, I was sitting by my window reading my book when I heard the gunshot as plain as day. That's when I dropped my book and ran over here. Detective Chief Inspector Wright looked down at her fluffy bedroom slippers and smiled. He then turned to Detective Constable Montague. You can send Mr. Barrett and Mr. Hillary home. Miss Darcy is our killer. Today, I'll talk about how to properly utilize your climax without getting all hot and bothered. And then I'll tell you how Detective Chief Inspector Wright knew that Imogen was the killer. In the dictionary, climax is described as the most intense, exciting, or important part of something. It even goes back as far as the mid 16th century Greek, meaning ladder, which makes sense because, like a ladder, to climax you must first rise, increasing in intensity until you hit that pinnacle, summit, high point where you then begin a descent back to the level from whence you began. In almost anything you do, there is a climax to be had. In sports, you're at the bat, the bases are loaded, and you have two strikes against you. The pitcher hopes to strike you out with this last pitch. He throws, you swing, you make perfect contact, sending the ball on a trajectory toward the stands. It's going, 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 grand slam home run. This is the moment of the climax. Regarding your story, it is the ultimate turning point. The moment everything that has been building in your story, the rising action, the tension, the conflict, even the plight of your protagonist, comes to its highest point, that's the climax. If you remember in part 2, when I talked about the rising action and how it continually rose higher than the previous point, well, just like the roller coaster I use as an example, the action is rising until it reaches its resolution, its climax. You take your seat in the first car of the roller coaster ride you have stood in line for. The ride starts its slow but steady rise. All you see is the sky ahead. After a while, it stops rising and runs along a level portion of the track. A moment later, and it continues its rise. While you're continuously anticipating the drop, it levels off again, increasing the tension. Then it continues its ascent, up, 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 until it reaches its high point. It sits there for a moment. All your anxiety and built up tension is culminated at this point. This is the moment you have been waiting for, the reason you stood in line for so long. And when the roller coaster tips over the edge, racing back to the ground and taking you with it, you are in the moment of the climax. The climax in your story is your end goal. It's what your story is always heading toward. If your protagonist has spent the entire story chasing after a rare artifact, the moment he finally attains it, he has reached the climax. If your protagonist has spent the entire story running for her life from a crazed killer, the moment he finally catches up to her and is about to kill her, but instead he himself is killed by her hands or someone else's or by an act of God, during that moment, she has reached the climax. Even if it's something as simple as a little boy proving to himself that he can catch a butterfly, with all the ups and downs and the inventiveness of the little boy who has to do more than he would normally do, once he finally catches the elusive butterfly, he has reached the climax. No matter what happens in your story, whether it's a romance, a horror, or adventure, the protagonist that you create is always working toward the climax. Without one, your story hasn't fulfilled its obligation because it's not actually trying to get to a goal. Imagine a man, your protagonist, gets a glimpse of the woman of his dreams on a passing train. So he sets out to find and meet her. He spends the entire story getting closer to finally meeting her when he suddenly, for no apparent reason, gives up. He doesn't achieve his goal. Your story has no climax. Not only have you angered your reader who has been turning page after page, anticipating the moment when your protagonist finally meets her, only to be let down, you have refused to see to its end that which you based your entire story on. Let's say your protagonist is a college girl who has been chased into an old abandoned house. She is finally caught and held in a cellar. She spends the entire story trying to find a way to escape, or at least call for help. Each time she gets a little closer to freedom, her captors stop her. In her several attempts to escape, she has managed to incapacitate two of her three captors. The tension has been building, leveling off each time she beats one of her captors. She has just one left. The tension and conflict are growing as she gets ready to overwhelm her third and final captor. But then she doesn't. She just gives up for no apparent reason. Evidently, your story doesn't reach its intended climax. From the moment the college girl, your protagonist, is chased by her captors, there is conflict and the rising action begins. And if you remember, the point of the rising action is to bring your story along with your protagonist to its climax. If there is no climax, then everything that your protagonist has been working toward would have been for nothing. The climax would have been the moment your protagonist beats her third and final captor and makes it out of the house to safety. Without that important part of your story taking place, your story isn't finished. Now, I'm not saying that there haven't ever been stories written without a climax. Sure, there have been. Just like there are songs written without a chorus. Writers might choose to write a story without a climax to maybe focus on the events leading up to the ending rather than the ending itself, or simply to create a sense of unease or incompleteness, or the climax is simply implied. There is always an exception to the rule, but traditionally, a story needs a climax to build toward. Without it, your story loses all meaning. Like I said earlier, what your protagonist has been working toward would have been for nothing. Even if it's something as simple as the boy chasing that butterfly. If after coming closer until he's finally about to capture it, he suddenly takes his net and goes home, the story has lost all meaning for the reader. Instead of coming away from that story with a sense of accomplishment, they are left with questions. Furthermore, everything the boy had done up until that moment would be meaningless because it hasn't amounted to anything. He's right back where he started, never having caught a butterfly, which is fine for him. Maybe this is something the little boy does every day with no intention of ever catching that butterfly. But the problem is, you, the writer, have taken your reader along on this pointless journey, and by doing so, wasted their time. When you are writing your story, although the climax is something that will not occur until the end, it is important to know that everything you do up until that point is to build to it. Whether it's eluding a killer, making a climb to the top of a difficult mountain, or just trying to catch a butterfly in your backyard. Your intention should be to build to an intense moment that your protagonist can arrive at, and by doing so, resolve the issue or issues he began with and leave your reader with a sense of accomplishment. And now I'll finish the story I call A Shot in the Dark. Imogen looked shocked when she heard that she was believed to be the killer. That's crazy, she said. I rushed over here just like Tom and Francis. Why couldn't either one of them be the killer? Detective Chief Inspector Wright turned to her with a discerning glare. I will explain exactly why you and not either of them is the killer. Firstly, you claim to have heard the shot from your window on the ground floor. Interesting but perplexing since the decedent's window is shut tight. It would be impossible for you to hear anything from inside your apartment across the courtyard. Secondly, you claim to have come over immediately after hearing the shot, but that is also inconceivable. I am certain that you came over here at least a couple of hours earlier, waited around for a while, and then killed the woman in that apartment. Imogen looked at Detective Chief Inspector Wright and began laughing. That's just your wrong interpretation of what happened. No, it isn't. And I'll not only prove that you killed her, but why you decided to. The two witnesses, as well as the two constables and Detective Constable Montague and Imogen, waited quietly to hear what he had to say. You see, Miss Darcy, it has been raining nonstop all evening. If you look at Mr. Barrett and Mr. Hillary, they are considerably wet from their run over here. But you are completely dry, so you had to have been over here long enough for your clothing to dry. And since you are wearing fluffy slippers, they would need at least 2 or more hours to dry to their current state. And as for the why, as I stood next to the body, I noticed the unique lover's bracelet on her wrist, identical to the one you're wearing. Then I knew. You said your apartment faces the walkway. That's when you must have seen your boyfriend heading to her apartment. You followed and waited until he left. Then you killed her out of jealousy. You were about to run back to your apartment when Mr. Barrett and Mr. Hillary came running up the walkway. Thanks for watching, and if you found anything that I said beneficial to you in any way, hit that subscribe button because you never know. My next video might just be helpful too.